To talk more about this, we chat to Suud Institute Director Dr. Madut, who's a professor of citizenship and public affairs at Syracuse University in the United States of America, which is where he joins us now. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. This has been, one would say, a very baffling conflict, given the fact that this has been such a long fought for a bid for self-actualization for the people of South Sudan, and barely 2 years into reaching that milestone, you have the two leaders fighting for power. Is there any end in sight?
Hello, ma'am. Yes, I think you are completely right in saying that the people of South Sudan, and indeed the whole world, rejoiced when South Sudan attained her sovereign status as a new country in the world in 2011. But it was not long before this euphoria was squashed by the outbreak of a new civil war triggered by power struggle within the ruling people's Sudan People's Liberation Movement between the president and the vice president. The whole world has also yet again gone to their length to mediate this conflict and sign multiple peace agreements since 2015. Giving a sense of respite for the people of South Sudan and increase the hope that eventually this conflict would be resolved and South Sudan will go back on its track back to stability, prosperity, and safety that the people of South Sudan had voted for when they decided overwhelmingly, over 99%, in favor of separation. But unfortunately, none of that euphoria, none of that hope and expectation has been lived up to, neither in terms of the political leaders themselves prioritizing the stability of the country, nor in terms of services being given to the people to give them a sense that there has been a momentous break from when South Sudan was part of Sudan and all the abuse, the slave trade, the genocide, the humiliation, and when they have become independent, expecting a better treatment.
And I think this is
none of that has lived up.
This is what is so saddening, to think that we now see a situation where, and you could tell me if there have been further splinters in terms of the ethnic divide. One would have never thought there'd be a time when the Dinka and the Nuer people would be standing on opposite ends of the conflict. So tell me, how many more armed groups are there since we've seen the military split into two on the side of President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar? At some point, I think the count was at 12 armed groups, and I think this is what the revitalized peace agreement in 2018 factored in, the number of parties that should have been included.
So indeed, that is that. Let me just say at the outset that what you see as being an ethnic confrontation, whether this is between Nuer and Dinka or between the two biggest groups in South Sudan and the rest, actually it is a confrontation between two maniacal leaders who are contesting state power, but you often end up ethnicizing that competition in order to draw their communities into the war, which is the war that the ordinary people have no benefit from, have no interest in, but often being drawn into it by their leaders. And as we stand, the peace agreement, which is now on the brink of collapse, is between the party of the president, the SPLM, and the party of the vice president, the SPLM-IO, and multitudes of other smaller entities that have signed this peace agreement. There are two more parties that are whole-out parties that have not signed the agreement. One is called the National Salvation Front, and the other one is called South Sudan United Front. And those ones are outside. Those two main ones are outside. The ones that have signed the peace agreement and have created the government of national unity, which is prevailing today, were simply expected to implement the peace agreement, steer the country towards a transition where there would be elections at the end of the interim period. These two main parties have failed in doing so because correct implementation of the peace agreement to lead the country out of misery is often seen by all sides, by both sides, as not being in their interest, because what they want is to stay in power. And if such a transition would lead them not to be in power anymore, they will scuttle it. And I think that is where we are. And South Sudanese are now saying, enough of these two people. We want peace, we want transition. If these two people cannot work out their disagreements, maybe the rest of the world should come in and help us. Your own president, brother comrade Ramaphosa, is one of those leaders who is being looked to as a potential to tell off the leaders of South Sudan and say, you created your own conflict, you created your own dispute. How difficult is it for you to sit down under a tree and sort it out?
So let's look at how to do that, to force both leaders to adhere according to the 2018 peace agreement and what that would entail. The current fighting that we're seeing now in the Upper Nile, I want to look closely at that particular area and why the conflict has occurred there. Now, what is very central also to the current conflict has been the unilateral creation of new states by President Salva Kiir. By creating new states, obviously you are dividing the resources, and let's face it, the battle for resources has been at the center of the South Sudan conflict, has been at the center of the conflict which was originally with Sudan. So how can mediators help bring an end to that? Okay, so just a minute on the recent conflict in Upper Nile and in Unity State. The 2018 peace agreement provided for something called security arrangements, which is a chapter of the agreement. And the security arrangements include a process which would then culminate in the unification of all the armed forces to create a national army which is more professional, which is lean, which is a reflection of the country's ethnic diversity. That is what needed to have been done. But President Kiir dragged his feet on the reunification of the armies. And instead of graduating those forces that were in cantonment for the last 3 years, President Kiir started incentivizing defections from the opposition to his side, paying money in order to weaken and draw down the opposition army. What has resulted from that is that his army, the so-called South Sudan army, was attacking the cantonment camps and attacking positions of the opposition. Instead of unifying them, he's attacking them, trying to weaken them. The result is that the vice president says, no, we cannot have a peace agreement where our positions are being attacked continuously. So he withdrew from the peace mechanisms, from the security arrangement mechanism. He withdrew and suspended his participation for the time being as a way to push President Kiir to say, no, we don't want to go down that path of going back to war. We just want peace. And the people of South Sudan are standing with Vice President Machar saying, yes, if peace is what you want,
that is what we want to. Let us tell President Kiir, all of us in South Sudan and across the continent, to stop attacking the positions of the opposition and instead work towards unification of the army, creation of a professional military, and it is this professional military which will guard the rest of the provisions of the peace agreement, such as holding of elections, and a political transition will be a lot more peaceful.
But
nobody wants war.
But surely the involvement of Uganda in its support for President Kiir and Sudan in its support for Riek Machar also muddies the waters.
Well, the involvement of Uganda on the side of President Kiir's army was long ago. That was before the peace agreement was signed. Yes, there has been a lot of talk about that, but that is no longer the case. Museveni and his army are no longer in South Sudan. Sudan government and his army are no longer in South Sudan. What there is in South Sudan is the National Army of South Sudan, called SSPDF. And what there is in South Sudan are opposition armies called SPLM-IO, SPLA-IO, under Riek Machar. And there are these other militia groups as well. And so what the people of South Sudan need, what the country of South Sudan needs, and what the whole world needs to help us achieve is to say, let us unify all these forces.
So as you say,
the national army.
And I want to get into that, because these splinter armies that you speak about, this is exactly what I'm referring to, because there are reports suggesting that Sudan and Uganda are supporting those different militia groups that obviously feed into the main conflict.
Yeah, that may have been the case in the past.
So you say
but, not
now?
anymore. I don't think there is no, I mean, currently as we speak, there is no Ugandan army in South Sudan supporting any side. There is no Sudan army in South Sudan supporting any side. What there is today are South Sudanese armed forces, South Sudanese armed militias, South Sudanese opposition armies, all of them trying to compete for public office by using force. And what the rational citizens and the rational world, rational continent of Africa is saying is that put down the weapons, let us move towards a peaceful transition to a democratic process, and ratchet down the level of rhetoric, which then causes these militarized responses. The people of South Sudan are tired of war. They don't want any foreign forces to come into their country. They don't want any local armies to fight it out. What they want is that all the armed forces be unified into a national army and make that army a professional one. And that professional army will then guide the country peacefully towards elections, so that South Sudanese, for once, will be able to elect their leaders.
So you're saying
because it's been 17 years since the last elected.
All right.
And they have not had a chance to elect their leaders.
All right, Dr. Jock Madut. Jock saying that it's down to the two leaders to bring about peace, and no outside interference can account for the conflict which continues now. That is the situation in South Sudan, saying that although there may be many splinter army groups, it's about the reunification of the army that also must be dealt with, and many other conditions of that revitalized 2018 peace agreement.